Now, as we know, Haryana government, it recently enacted what was known as a Haryana State Local Candidates Act of the year 2020. Now, what this act did was that it promoted 75% of reservations for locals in private sector. And this 75% of reservation, it was provided to locals in jobs which had salaries less than 30,000 per month. Now, similar kind of demands, it has emerged in other states, especially Andhra Pradesh, as well as Karnataka, as well as Maharashtra. Now, why this demand is there in the first place and what are the issues in fulfilling this demand is our topic of today's discussion. Now, before moving into what are the challenges in implementation of this law, let us know more about why this demand has emerged in the first place. Now, there are many reasons behind rise in such a demand for local reservation in private sector jobs. The first important reason is the rising unemployment in the country. Now we know that the agriculture sector of the country it is in state of distress because even after liberalization, the growth rate of agriculture sector it has limited to around 3.4% in an annual basis. Whereas on the other hand, Indian economy it has grown for more than 6% on an annual basis. Hence, you can see that the productivity of agriculture sector it is almost half than that of Indian economy in general. And this has created an agricultural distress in the country because farmers they have been unable to get the price of their crops which has led to increased state of debtness in the agriculture sector. Further, there have been many landowners in our country who have been displaced from their lands because their lands it has been acquisitioned by various state as well as private sector for developmental work, and these two reasons it has created what is called as a labor surplus in the country, and naturally country it should absorb this labor surplus to reduce the level of unemployment. But we know India's manufacturing sector it has not grown in a desired manner. Hence, India's manufacturing sector in particular, it has not been able to absorb this surplus labor of our country, which further adds to the rising unemployment in the country. And these particular section of society, especially these unemployed persons, they have been demanding a local reservation in their states. Further, India has been able or not able to achieve this inclusive growth, especially the backward sections of the society who are otherwise known as backward classes. They are not adequately represented in whatever jobs that have been created in the Indian economy. And this creates issues arising out of lack of inclusive growth in our country. And this lack of inclusive growth, it has further led to increased demand for reservation in local jobs. Also, locals in our country, they face stiff competition from migrant workers. For example, in the year of 2017 economic survey, it highlighted that as many as 65 million people in our country, they are migrant workers. And these migrant workers, they offer their services for a lower cost. Therefore, any private sector in general, they favor to get these migrant workers as their labor workforce. And this results into exclusion of locals from jobs, especially in the manufacturing sector. Further, there has been a practice of trade unionism in our country. As workers, they get together and form a trade union and they demand increased salaries and other benefits from these employers, which naturally increases the cost of doing business for industries. Hence, in order to discourage this trade unionism practices, what the industries they have started to hire people from outside the states that are specially migrants. Hence, this has resulted into further exclusion of locals from the jobs that are available in their respective states. Hence, you can see rising unemployment, lack of inclusive growth, increased migration, and trade unionism. These four factors they have added to the reasons that demand for local reservation in their private sector jobs. And naturally, states such as Haryana as well as Andhra Pradesh they have enacted laws to bring these local reservation in private sector jobs. But as you've already read in the news, and naturally, which has been reported throughout this entire season, is that these implementation of these laws they have faced many challenges in our country. Now, what are the challenges or issues in implementation of such laws? We will discuss this in this particular slide. Now, the first challenge that any such local reservation law it faces is related to the constitutional validity of this particular law. For example, High Court of Haryana and Punjab it only recently invalidated the Haryana government's reservation law which provided 75% of reservation. Now, what was the basis of declaring this law unconstitutional and void? In this regard, the High Court of Punjab and Haryana it highlighted that this particular local provision laws it violated several articles of the Indian Constitution. On the first hand, it violated Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. As this particular article it provides for right to freedom of speech and expression. And there are various subsections in this particular article. For example, Article 19, subsection 1 and subsection D, it ensures the right to individual to move freely throughout the country. And according to the High Court, this particular article it was violated by a local preservation law. Further, Article 19, subsection 1 and subsection G, it provides an individual right to profess any profession in our country. And hence, when you prevent an individual from seeking jobs in a particular state, it also restricts the application of Article 1, subsection G of this Article 19. Further, Article 19, subsection 5, it provides for imposition of reasonable restrictions by the state. And these reasonable restrictions, it can provide in interest of general public, especially with relation to scheduled tribes. And the High Court in this regard, it held that the reasonable restriction that was local reservation, it was not reasonable, rather it was unreasonable in nature. Further, Article 19, subsection 6, it provides for technical requirements. Hence, state can impose restriction based on these particular technical requirements. However, the Punjab High Court, it highlighted that the imposition of restriction, especially local reservation, it was a domicile related requirement. Hence, this particular local reservation, it failed to achieve the parameter of technical requirement. Thereby, it went against the provision of Article 19, subsection C 6 of this particular constitution. Further, what such law does is that it creates a difference between local residents, that of Haryana, and other migrant residents. And in this regard, the High Court it held that it violated the various principle that is fraternity that is enshrined in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, as it creates a social distinction in the society itself which goes against the common notion of universal brotherhood. Further, there is an article 35 in the Indian Constitution, and this particular article it states that the parliament it can enact a reservation under Article 16 subsection 4 of the Constitution, and it can limit the application of this act based on the requirement of a particular residence. Hence, you can say that a local reservation of job it can be cited under this particular article because it favors difference with relation to a residence of an individual. However, it is also important to note that it is the parliament, not state legislature, that can enact such bill. However, this Haryana Act it was enacted by the Haryana state government legislature. Hence, the High Court it highlighted that it went against the provision of Article 35. Further, it also violated the Article 14 of the Constitution because this particular article it favors right to equality. Hence, this particular provision that was local reservation it violated the right to equality between an individual in the country. Further, there are also economic rationale against the implementation of this particular act. For example, while implementing these act, officers of the state they needed to carry inspection of different industries in order to find out whether these industries they are implementing local reservation provision itself. And in this regard, the High Court highlighted that such local reservation requirement and inspection by state it will create an atmosphere of inspector raj, which went against the policy of the government that sought increased liberalization. Further, these requirements, such as imposition of local reservation, it will make difficult of availability of required labor. Further, it also stifles the labor market in the country, thereby making investments difficult in our country. Hence, you can say that local reservation requirements it goes against the principle of ease of doing business because it goes against the idea of one nation and one market, and thereby industries and manufacturing setups they will be apprehensive of setting up of new industries in an area which favors local reservation for individuals. Further, if local reservation is provided in a particular area, this means that the availability of labor will naturally reduce. And if a company it desires to employ certain kind of skilled labor, then it will have to incur additional cost in order to skill train this particular labor. And naturally, it will add to the cost of company, thereby going against the ease of doing business principle. Hence, you can say that the implementation of this act it favors from two different it faces challenges from two different conditions. The first, that the constitution validity of this act, especially when it is passed by a state legislature, it will be invalidated by the High or Supreme Court. While on the other hand, it also discourages the ease of doing business in the country. Thereby, it also challenges the implementation of this act from an economic point of view. Further, this act it acts as a short-term measure and it does not addresses the core issue of the Indian economy because we know that every region in the country it has a differential level of economic development. Hence, government through this policy it does not aim to address the level of differential geographical development in the country. Further, it also ignores the issue related to low quality of educational and skilling levels of the Indian workforce. And because it acts as a short term measure, hence it is not able to deal with the core issues of the Indian economy. Now, what should be the way forward for a particular state in order to provide jobs for an individual or residents of this country? Hence, in this regard, let us discuss few suggestions. The first suggestion in this regard, it is related that states it should rather take an incentives route in order to promote hiring of locals in the private sector jobs. Rather than imposing a requirement of reservation, state what it should do is that it should provide incentives to local industries in case they hire a certain amount of local workforce. And this will create a positive environment in the Indian economy and states economy in general. Further, what we should do or what a state should do is that it should create an enabling environment in our country. As by providing incentives to industry, it will create a level playing field where one state it can compete with other state in seeking investments as well as make conditions ease for setting up of businesses. Hence, What this enabling environment will do is that it will create a positive atmosphere for businesses in the country. And this in long run will create jobs as well as provide additional entrepreneur in opportunities for youth of our country. Further, government, what it should do, in addition to providing an enabling environment to business, that it should focus on educational and skilling efforts of India's workforce. As providing India's workforce with adequate educational and skilling opportunities, the government it can create a level of high skilled workforce. And this high skilled workforce is desirable for any kind of manufacturing industry. Further, what is needed, especially with respect to Indian economy, as it has a high labor surplus, is the need to establish labor-intensive sector industries, particularly with respect to textiles as well as leather industries. As these manufacturing industry, they are labor-intensive in nature, and naturally, they provide more job opportunities when you compare with high technical industries which are capital intensive in nature. Thereby, by taking an incentives route to promote local hiring, creating an enabling environment to promote businesses, promoting skill and educational levels of India's workforce, and creating labor intensive industries in a state is a desirable way forward for any state if it desires to provide jobs for its local population. Because local reservation policy it acts as a bandage to a wound called unemployment, whereas this problem of unemployment it requires surgery which can be done through promoting businesses which will provide with more job opportunities. Hence, this was all for first discussion of the day, which was on local reservation in private sector jobs. And with this, let us move to the